Tonight, we stand on the banks of a river that never seems to sleep, its slow waters shimmering under the moonlight, as if they too remember what happened here centuries ago. You breathe in the thick air of Cambodia's lowlands, a mix of sweet blossoms and the faint earthy musk of rain-soaked soil, and you feel the weight of a kingdom caught between two giants. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you, no pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family scattered but still connected. Alright, now go ahead and dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You wander back through the 1500s when Cambodia was still licking its wounds from the collapse of Angkor 2 centuries earlier. The days of mighty stone cities dominating the jungle were long gone. Now the capital shifted restlessly between riverside settlements like Longvek, hoping to stay one step ahead of invasions. Siam to the west had risen from its own struggles to become a formidable force under the Ayutthaya kings. Vietnam to the east was slowly recovering from internal wars, its reach stretching into the Mekong Delta. And there, like a child, walking on a narrow bridge between two bulls, stood Cambodia. Tribute missions sailed both ways, gold and elephants offered to Siamese courts. One year, jars of rice wine and spices to Vietnamese lords the next. Historians still argue whether this was strategic brilliance or sheer desperation. But to you it feels like a kingdom trying to breathe while two larger lungs keep squeezing. The quirky detail Cambodian envoys sometimes carried not just gifts, but exotic animals once, even a pair of sun bears, their tiny puzzled faces peeking from bamboo cages just to impress their overlords. You imagine the confusion on both sides. Thanks for the bear. Yet these gestures mattered. In those days, appearances of loyalty were as valuable as loyalty itself. Kings like Ang Chan, I learned quickly that bowing deeply to Ayutthaya's envoys might buy peace for a year, while sending envoys east could spark rumors in Siamese courts. Playing both sides was an art, one that required silk gloves and iron nerves. You picture Ang Chan pacing his palace at Longvek, the sound of crickets rising from the moat, wondering which messenger might betray him. To one side, Siamese officials demanded tribute and military support against their enemies. To the other, Vietnamese lords whispered offers of protection that came with a price like vines wrapping slowly around a tree until the trunk can no longer breathe. You step softly across wooden floors polished by centuries of barefoot courtiers, feeling the tension that once filled these halls. This was a time when alliances were made over cups of palm wine sealed with oaths, and broken with the same ease as snapping a twig. Cambodia's kings had to master the language of submission without surrender, promising fealty while secretly writing letters to the other side. A scholar once compared it to dancing on the tip of a spear, and as you imagine that you almost wince. Yet somehow Cambodia endured its people, continuing to plant rice-carved statues and whisper prayers to spirits that had watched over them since the days of Angkor. The stars above shimmer, as if they too have seen the games of kings and the suffering of peasants who only wanted peace. You sense the quiet strength of a kingdom that even in weakness found ways to survive. And as the moonlight glides over the river's surface, you know this is just the beginning of a long, uneasy dance between loyalty and survival. You follow the river as it curves like a serpent into the 16th century, its surface now dotted with small wooden boats slipping through reeds. The air hums with the smell of fish drying in the sun, mingled with the smoke of cooking fires drifting from stilted houses. Cambodia's heart beats steadily here, even as unseen hands begin to tug at it from opposite ends. To the west, Ayutthaya glows like a jewel, golden spires catching the sunrise, bustling markets thrumming with traders from India, Persia, and beyond. To the east, Dai Viet, the Vietnamese realm, pulses with its own ambitions, creeping southward along the coast, pushing into the rich lands that would one day become the Mekong Delta. You can almost feel the magnetic pull of both powers, each eager to claim the loyalty of the smaller kingdom in between. The Cambodian court at Longvek watches all of this with wary eyes. Kings like Ang Chan, I understand that tribute is not just a gift, it is a declaration of who you fear and who you favor. Sending tribute to Ayutthaya brings Siamese troops marching in as allies, though they sometimes stay longer than invited. Offering tribute to Dai Viet can summon Vietnamese aid, but it also plants seeds of influence that grow like stubborn weeds. Historians still argue whether Cambodia leaned more toward one side during these early years or truly balanced between them. What's clear is that both Siam and Vietnam kept careful lists of when Cambodia bowed and when it hesitated. The quirky detail. Somewhere in this period, Siamese chroniclers mention Cambodian envoys arriving with a giant gong of friendship so large it took several men to carry. It was said that striking it once at the Siamese court would echo for days, a sound to remind them that Cambodia knew its place. You can almost hear the low, resonant hum trailing into the distance, mingling with the soft croak of frogs in the rice paddies. Yet beneath these exchanges, tension brews. Dai Viet begins encouraging Vietnamese settlers to move into the fertile delta lands, offering them plots of land where Cambodians had long farmed. Slowly, Vietnamese influence digs roots into Cambodia's eastern edges. Farmers whisper about new officials who speak a different language, build homes in a different style, and bring new customs. To the west, Siamese traders grow bolder, their caravans snaking into Cambodian markets, bringing goods and gossip and reminders of Ayutthaya's power. You stroll through a Cambodian village at dusk, feeling the warmth of hearth fires and the chatter of families sharing bowls of rice. The people here may not care who sits on the throne, as long as the taxes aren't crushing and soldiers stay away. Yet they know the signs: a sudden surge of Siamese envoys, a sudden construction of Vietnamese outposts. These are omens whispered over bowls of soup as the cicadas sing. Ayutthaya's pull grows stronger with its military campaigns, and Cambodian kings sometimes ride with Siamese forces only to later regret the obligations that come with such alliances. Meanwhile, Dai Viet's grip tightens not with armies, but with settlers, officials, and strategic marriages. You feel Cambodia bending under the weight of both like bamboo, swaying in two winds at once. As night deepens, you sense the unease that lingers over the kingdom. The stars seem brighter, but they are cold, distant witnesses to the choices of kings who must play a game they cannot win outright. And as the frogs croak and the river reflects the moon, you realize that Cambodia's loyalty is not just a question of politics, it's survival itself, shaped by every tide that flows in and out of its fragile heart. You drift forward into the late 16th century, when the figure of King Naresuan of Siam begins to loom like a storm cloud on Cambodia's horizon. You stand in Ayutthaya's royal court, the air heavy with incense, as Naresuan sharpens his plans against Burma and glances toward Cambodia as both a buffer and a prize. The Ayutthayan chronicles paint him as a warrior king, fierce and decisive, with a penchant for crushing enemies on elephant back. Cambodian scribes, on the other hand, record the unease his name stirred a shadow, creeping eastward, promising both protection and domination. You can almost hear the whispering among Cambodian courtiers: align with him and risk suffocation, defy him and risk annihilation. At this time, Cambodia's throne is anything but stable. Kings rise and fall, sometimes assassinated by rivals, sometimes exiled by foreign armies, sometimes just plain unlucky. Historians still argue whether Naresuan personally led campaigns into Cambodia or sent loyal generals, but the chronicles agree that Siam's influence pressed hard during these years. Cambodian rulers found themselves swearing oaths of loyalty to Ayutthaya while quietly wondering how to slip free. You watch King Satha, for instance, send envoys with tribute and flowery words, all while eyeing Vietnamese assistance as a counterbalance. It's like trying to paddle a canoe with two oars pointing in opposite directions, awkward, exhausting, and almost guaranteed to tip you over. The quirky tidbit. During one tense meeting, a Cambodian envoy reportedly tried to lighten the mood, by presenting Siamese officials with an elephant trained to kneel on command. The animal promptly decided to lie down and nap instead, to the embarrassment of the envoy and the suppressed laughter of the court. You picture the scene, a giant elephant sprawled like a lazy dog, while diplomacy hangs in the balance. Sometimes history gifts you moments that are as human as they are political. As Narizwan's campaigns ripple through the region, Cambodian villages brace themselves. Siamese troops march through demanding supplies. Farmers hand over rice, grumbling quietly, but knowing resistance means worse. In the royal courts, alliances shift with the seasons. One year, Cambodia's king rides alongside Siam's forces against Burma. The next, he secretly negotiates with Vietnamese emissaries, hoping to secure a lifeline if Siam's shadow grows too large. This back and forth is exhausting, but it keeps the kingdom breathing, if barely. You stand at the edge of a Cambodian battlefield, the air thick with the smell of trampled grass and the distant rumble of elephants. The fighting is brutal, but strangely formal, with banners fluttering and war drums pounding like giant heartbeats. Soldiers shout not with hatred, but with the resignation of men caught in a game they didn't design. When the dust settles, the borders blur a little more, and another Cambodian oath is extracted at sword point. Back in the palace, King Satha stares into the candlelight, weighing impossible choices. To defy Siam is to risk being burned, but to submit too deeply is to risk losing his crown entirely. The Vietnamese court, watching from afar, sends polite letters and subtle promises like a spider weaving a quiet web. And so Cambodia dances as it always does between fire and water, trying to stay alive without being consumed. Night falls again, and you hear the low hum of monks chanting in a temple perched above the river. Their voices float on the air, calm and unwavering, even as kingdoms clash. You close your eyes to the sound, knowing that beneath the noise of war and politics, Cambodia's spirit still holds fragile, yes, but unbroken, like a lotus blooming in muddy water. You wake to the scent of wet earth after rain somewhere along the Mekong's winding banks, where mist clings to the treetops like silvery threads. As you step quietly through the morning fog, you notice the landscape has begun to change. The villages here speak a mix of tongues, Khmer and Vietnamese intertwining, and the roofs of houses take on slightly different curves. It is the 17th century now, and Vietnamese hands are slowly reaching westward, settling into lands that once belonged only to Cambodia. These are the first tendrils of something larger, creeping almost unnoticed like vines climbing a wall. The Nguyen lords of southern Vietnam, hungry for fertile land and access to the sea, encourage their people to move into the Mekong Delta. They build canals, plant rice, and establish small trading posts. To the Cambodian court, these newcomers at first seem like helpful neighbors. After all, they bring goods and sometimes even military support. But as years pass, the settlers no longer ask for permission, they simply stay. Historians still argue whether this expansion was a calculated policy of colonization or just the natural movement of people into open spaces. Either way, the effect is the same. Cambodian farmers wake up to find themselves outnumbered in their own fields. The quirky tidbit: some Vietnamese settlers brought with them water puppetry, a unique art form where wooden puppets dance on the water's surface. Imagine Cambodian children gathering at dusk, giggling as dragons and farmers splash around in the flooded paddies, blissfully unaware that the performers behind the show were slowly becoming their new neighbors, and in time, their overlords. Culture, as it often does, weaves itself into conquest without anyone fully noticing. In Phnom Penh, the royal court feels the pressure mounting. Kings send pleas eastward for help against Siam, only to realize that Vietnamese aid comes with a price: more settlements, more officials stationed in Cambodian lands, more influence creeping into royal decisions. You see courtiers whispering in darkened corridors, debating whether to push back or play along. The Queen Mother advises caution. Generals demand action. The king sighs, knowing that every decision leads to a new chain wrapped around his throne. At the same time, to the west, Siam remains vigilant. Ayutthaya watches this Vietnamese encroachment with narrowed eyes, aware that Cambodia is slipping further into a tug of war. Siamese armies occasionally march into Cambodian territory, claiming to protect the kingdom from Vietnamese threats, but they rarely leave without taking something in return: a fortress, a hostage prince, or a hefty tribute. You can almost hear the collective groan of Cambodian villagers. Here we go again, another round of help that leaves us poorer than before. You wander through a Cambodian temple where monks sweep the stone floors with gentle strokes. Their chants echo softly, and in their calm you sense the kingdom's resilience. Even as foreign influences seep in, Khmer traditions hold firm in these sacred spaces. The smell of incense, the flicker of oil lamps, the rhythm of prayers, they form an anchor against the tides of change. But beyond these walls, the political game grows sharper. Vietnamese officials begin advising Cambodian kings, sometimes even choosing which prince should take the throne. Siam responds with its own puppets, installing rulers loyal to Ayutthaya. You watch the Cambodian monarchy become less about ruling and more about surviving, each king balancing on a thin wire stretched between two hungry powers. As night falls over the delta, you see the silhouettes of new settlements glowing faintly in the distance, their lights reflecting on the water like scattered stars. The crickets sing, unaware of the slow transformation unfolding around them. You breathe in the humid air and realize that Cambodia, once a proud center of its own empire, is now caught in a slow squeeze where every alliance is a gamble and every friendship a leash. You find yourself gliding through gilded palace halls where silk curtains flutter in the warm breeze and the scent of jasmine mingles with incense smoke thick enough to trace in the air. It's a court alive with whispers, laughter, and the soft clinking of golden cups filled with fermented palm wine. Here kings and queens make choices not just with armies or edicts, but with marriages that cross borders and blur loyalties. Cambodia's royal families weave alliances with Siamese princesses and Vietnamese nobles alike, each union a fragile thread tying their fate to one side or the other. Imagine a grand wedding, the Cambodian prince in robes embroidered with dragons, the bride, a Siamese princess whose smile hides the weight of political chess. These marriages bring promises of peace and protection, but also chains disguised as gifts. Historians still argue whether these alliances strengthened Cambodia's position or simply deepened its dependence. You lean in to catch snippets of court gossip, tales of queens who could sway their husbands' loyalties, and princes caught between family duty and the sharp edges of foreign demands. The quirky detail. Some royal ceremonies included elephant races to celebrate marriages, because nothing says unity like a stampede of massive beasts with riders who barely hold on. You can almost see the elephants barreling across the palace grounds, trumpeting triumphantly as courtiers cheer nervously from the sidelines. It's a wild contrast to the delicate diplomacy unfolding inside the halls, reminding you that even the most refined courts had their moments of chaos. Behind the festive veneer, however, tensions simmer. Cambodian kings find their crowns increasingly bound by foreign strings, Siamese generals demanding military aid in return for support, Vietnamese officials advising on royal succession, sometimes even ordering princes exiled or imprisoned. The throne becomes less a seat of independent power and more a puppet stage where Siam and Vietnam pull the strings. You picture a Cambodian king, once proud and defiant, now pacing his chamber, the laughter of the wedding long faded, replaced by the cold reality of limited freedom. At the same time, the people watch and wait, their daily lives caught between the pomp of palace intrigues and the harsh demands of armies marching through their villages. Taxes rise to pay for these endless games of allegiance. Farmers give up more of their harvest to feed foreign troops. Mothers whisper prayers for peace that never quite arrives. The quiet resilience of ordinary Cambodians planting rice and lighting lanterns contrasts sharply with the palace drama. But both worlds are bound by the same fragile thread of survival. You wander past a statue of the ancient Khmer kings, their stone faces weathered but serene, as if watching over a kingdom forever caught between ambition and endurance. And in the twilight, you hear the faint, distant call of a flute, melancholy, hopeful, and impossibly old, carrying the story of a land whose loyalties have long been as fluid as the rivers flowing through it. You stand on a muddy battlefield near the banks of the Mekong, the ground trembling beneath the hoofbeats of war elephants and the clatter of armor. The sky is heavy with smoke and the cries of soldiers caught in a brutal tug-of-war between Siam and Vietnam, both eager to control Cambodian fortresses that guard the kingdom's fragile heart. You sense the weight of desperation pressing down on the land where battles aren't just for territory, but for the very soul of Cambodia. Siam and Vietnam fight over forts like Odong and Long Vec, turning them into pawns in their broader regional rivalry. Cambodian soldiers are often caught in the middle, fighting for foreign masters who change more often than the seasons. Historians still argue whether Cambodia was simply a battlefield or an active player leveraging these conflicts to its advantage, but the scars on its soil tell a tale of endless struggle. Here's a quirky note. During one siege, it is said that Cambodian defenders attempted to flood the moat by diverting a nearby river, only to accidentally flood their own camp, instead forcing a chaotic retreat under the confused shouts of their own commanders. You can imagine the soldiers slipping in the mud, their battle cries turning into curses and laughter all at once. Sometimes war is less about glory and more about luck, or lack thereof. Despite the turmoil, Cambodian kings try to navigate these battles with as much cunning as possible. They promise support to Siam one day, offer safe passage to Vietnamese forces the next, all while praying no one notices their shifting loyalties. Yet each victory or defeat redraws the map just a little more, eroding the kingdom's borders and independence. You watch the dusty camps where weary soldiers share stories under the stars, their voices low, their hope flickering like candlelight in a storm. The war also brings cultural exchanges you wouldn't expect. Siamese soldiers introduce new styles of armor, Vietnamese officers teach unfamiliar tactics, and local artisans craft weapons blending all these influences. Cambodia becomes a melting pot of military ideas, each side hoping to claim the kingdom's allegiance through both force and fascination. As dusk settles, you wander through a battered village where children play with carved wooden elephants, unaware that these toys represent the very beasts that once thundered across the fields in battles that shaped their homeland. You feel the pulse of history beneath their laughter, pain, and resilience entwined like the roots of ancient trees. And as night falls over the battlefield, you hear the distant rumble of drums and the low murmur of monks chanting for peace, a gentle reminder that even amidst war, the human spirit seeks calm and continuity. Cambodia's story, you realize, is not just one of conquest, but also of endurance in the face of relentless storms. You find yourself standing on a narrow ridge overlooking a patchwork of rice paddies and winding rivers, the humid air thick with the scent of wet earth and ripening fruit. The 17th century sun beats down mercilessly, but the tension in the air is heavier still. Cambodian kings, caught like frogs in a pot, heating slowly, make desperate gambits to survive. They shift alliances as swiftly as the monsoon winds, hoping that by playing Siam and Vietnam against each other, they might carve out a little breathing room. But you know from the glint in their eyes and the set of their jaws that every gamble risks betrayal and ruin. Some kings try to outsmart their larger neighbors by switching sides mid-conflict, offering one tribute to Siam while secretly negotiating with Vietnamese generals. They hope that by being unpredictable, they can keep both empires off balance. Historians still argue whether this strategy bought Cambodia more autonomy or simply invited deeper interference from both powers. To you, it feels like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers where a single misstep could mean the end of a dynasty or a life. The quirky detail: one king reportedly sent Siamese envoys a gift of fermented fish paste, so pungent it cleared the room, effectively ending negotiations with an unexpected and hilarious standoff. You chuckle, imagining dignitaries fleeing the chamber, eyes watering, while the Cambodian court tried to stifle their laughter. It's moments like this that remind you that even in the gravest political games, human folly and humor find a way. Meanwhile, villages caught in the crossfire watch their rulers gamble with lives and lands. Farmers grumble about conscription and rising taxes. Mothers whisper prayers for sons taken to fight battles far from home. The loyalty of the people becomes as fluid as the river itself, shifting according to which side brings the least harm or the most food. You imagine a weary soldier returning from a campaign, his uniform torn and muddy, greeted by his family's tentative smiles, and a village eager for the fighting to stop. Courts become arenas of suspicion and intrigue. Kings fear their own nobles may be spies for Siam or Vietnam, and every feast is shadowed by whispered warnings. You sense the exhaustion that comes not just from war, but from the endless game of survival played with invisible rules. Still, Cambodian rulers cling to hope, sometimes foolish, sometimes fierce, that the next move will bring peace rather than disaster. As the sun sinks low, casting long shadows over the paddies, you hear the distant song of a lone flute carried on the breeze. It speaks of longing and loss of kingdoms caught between giants, and the small, stubborn flame of endurance flickering in the dark. You step into the dim glow of candlelight flickering inside a modest chamber where courtiers whisper secrets and sip tea thick with ginger and cinnamon. The 17th century's Great Vietnamese Civil War, the Trinh Nguyen conflict, has spilled like ink across Cambodia's fragile borders, dragging the kingdom deeper into the murky waters of proxy struggles. To the east, rival Vietnamese factions send emissaries and soldiers into Cambodian lands, each hoping to secure allies or outposts. To the west, Siam watches and waits, ready to exploit any weakness. You feel Cambodia's sovereignty slipping through its fingers like fine sand. The Cambodian court becomes a stage for competing interests, with factions aligned to either the Trinh lords in the north or the Nguyen in the south. Kings navigate a labyrinth of loyalties, forced to pledge fealty to one side while clandestinely courting the other. Historians still argue how much agency Cambodian rulers truly had in these years, but what's clear is that the kingdom's fate was tied to decisions made far beyond its borders in Vietnamese halls and Siamese courts. The quirky tidbit: some Cambodian envoys took to carrying two different sets of gifts, one for each Vietnamese faction, to avoid offending either side, often doubling the size of their caravans and causing quite the spectacle. You can picture these lavish processions, camels and elephants lumbering down narrow jungle paths adorned with silk and spices, a practical juggling act disguised as diplomacy. The war's impact ripples through everyday life. Villages face raids by armed bands, loyal to one side or the other. Trade routes become perilous, and families find themselves divided by allegiances. You overhear a mother telling her children stories of distant battles while quietly hoping they will never have to fight. Soldiers march through Cambodian towns, their faces weary and their loyalties uncertain. Meanwhile, Cambodia's kings try to keep their grip on power amid this chaos. Some switch allegiances openly, others deceive in shadowed rooms. The kingdom becomes a chessboard for regional ambitions, and each move is met with anxious silence. You imagine the sleepless nights of these rulers, torn between preserving their own lives, their thrones, and the welfare of a people caught in the middle. In the temple courtyards, monks chant prayers for peace and protection, their voices weaving through the turmoil like a fragile thread of hope. You feel the paradox of Cambodia's story, a land battered by empires but sustained by faith and resilience, clinging to identity even as its borders blur and its rulers' choices narrow. As the candle burns low, you take a deep breath and let the quiet settle around you. This chapter of Cambodia's history is messy, complicated, and painfully human, full of whispered deals, broken promises, and the eternal hope that the next dawn might bring a little light. You walk slowly through the smoky ruins of Phnom Penh and Udong, the smell of charred wood and crushed stone hanging heavy in the air. The flicker of dying embers illuminates broken walls, where once proud palaces stood, symbols of Cambodian resilience, now scarred by decades of conflict. Cambodia's loyalties, stretched thin and frayed, have left it vulnerable to the very forces it once tried to balance. The kingdoms of Siam and Vietnam have waged war, not just on battlefields, but across the streets and fields of this battered land. You hear the echoes of past promises whispered in the shadows, oaths made in desperation, and broken with equal haste. Historians still argue whether these burned capitals were inevitable casualties of a broader regional struggle or avoidable tragedies wrought by miscalculation and betrayal. Whatever the cause, the ruins speak for themselves. Cambodia's autonomy is slipping piece by piece. Amid the destruction, the people carry on. Market stalls rise again among the rubble, children play among the fallen bricks, and monks rebuild temples with hands calloused but spirits unbroken. You imagine a young girl, her face streaked with soot but eyes bright, lighting a candle in a shrine and whispering a prayer for peace, an echo of countless others who find solace amid chaos. The quirky detail. It's said that during one siege, a Siamese general ordered his troops not to burn a certain temple because his mother had once been sheltered there as a child. The soldiers complied, a rare moment of mercy shining through the brutality of war. You can picture the temple standing quietly amid flames, a small island of grace in a sea of destruction. The battles over Cambodian fortresses leave scars not only on the land, but on its rulers. Kings find themselves more puppets than monarchs caught between foreign ambitions and their own people's yearning for peace. They negotiate, bribe, and sometimes flee, trying to hold together what remains of their kingdom's dignity. You sense the weary sigh of a nation battered but still standing, its heart bruised but beating. The smoke rises into a sky that has witnessed so much settling slowly over fields that will one day bloom again. And as the night deepens, you hear the soft murmur of prayers weaving through the ruins, promising that Cambodia's story is far from over. You stand at the edge of a twilight-drenched landscape where the once vibrant pulse of Cambodia's independence flickers like a dying flame. The 18th century has crept in, and with it, the slow but certain fading of the kingdom's autonomy. Cambodia has become a chess piece in the grand game between Siam and Vietnam, no longer a player with true power, but a pawn moved at will. The weight of centuries of shifting loyalties and broken promises bears down, and you can almost hear the whispered laments of kings who once dreamed of sovereignty. French traders and missionaries have begun to cast curious glances toward this vulnerable land, their sails appearing on the horizon like distant hope or new threats. Historians still argue whether French colonialism was an inevitable outcome of regional weakness or a deliberate exploitation of Cambodia's struggles. What's clear is that the kingdom's diminished independence paved the way for a foreign power eager to stake its claim. The quirky detail. Some local legends speak of a mysterious French trader who was so enchanted by Cambodian silk that he attempted to smuggle bolts hidden inside hollowed-out elephants, an endeavor as audacious as it was doomed. You chuckle imagining elephants lumbering through dense jungle, oblivious to their secret cargo. It's a small reminder that even in serious history, human quirks abound. Cambodia's kings, weary from centuries of trying to appease two empires, now find themselves negotiating with new masters. Their voices quieter, their options fewer. Tributary missions continue, but now the letters carry different seals, and the promises bear new signatures. The country's culture, rich and ancient, persists stubbornly. Temples still echo with chants. Festivals still light the night skies, but the political landscape has changed irreversibly. You walk through a quiet village where elders sit beneath a banyan tree, sharing stories of a time when Cambodia was a kingdom caught between giants, but still its own master. Their words float on the warm breeze, a soft thread linking past and present. You feel the gentle fading of an era, not with a bang, but a whisper, like the last ripple on a calm river. As darkness falls, you breathe in the night air, thick with the scent of frangipani and distant rain. The stars shimmer above, steady and eternal, watching over a land whose spirit endures, even as empires rise and fall. You close your eyes and let the quiet settle, knowing that while Cambodia's autonomy may have dimmed its heartbeats on, ready for whatever dawn awaits. Tonight's journey through Cambodia's tangled history comes to a gentle close as the stars twinkle softly above their light, casting a serene glow over rivers that have carried so many stories of kings and commoners, battles and embraces losses, and stubborn hope. You feel the cool night air brushing against your skin, a soothing balm after centuries of tension and turmoil. Imagine the distant song of a night bird, its call echoing through quiet forests, reminding you that life continues in cycles of shadow and light. The kingdoms and empires may rise and fall, loyalties may shift like the rivers, but the land itself holds memories deeper than any conquest. As you nestle into comfort, let the weight of history fade into the background, replaced by the soft rhythm of your own breath and the whisper of leaves rustling outside your window. Remember that even in the darkest times, resilience blooms quietly like a lotus flower, unfolding at dawn, pure and unyielding. So as your eyes grow heavy, take solace in the thought that Cambodia's spirit, shaped by centuries of delicate balance between Siam and Vietnam, remains unbroken. The stories you've heard tonight are not just echoes of the past, but seeds of understanding, nurturing a hope that history's complexities can teach us patience, humility, and grace. Now drift slowly into sleep, cradled by the gentle hum of the night, knowing you've traveled through time and place, witnessing a kingdom's dance between survival and sovereignty.